To speak to the history of the interaction with me with personnel of a special interest, see the motion flow of psychology there outflowing from local familia as my, whatever, dissidential voice to that. And it seems like they're probably attached to external state actors, so not legitimate, outflowing from my familial unit. So I guess keep that in mind with the desirous interaction to dispel legitimacy of voice, and do not connotate outside of the well-knowing to be the case multi-overtonal and refracting in a transmutive linguistical fashion through fact and space-time explicit and allegory side chaining and sort of geometry you'll see of literal and physics nature in flux to describe history and just generally get us to this epoch of reality. But in no way am I not knowing which layer is which. And I guess the problem post-COVID is that you have an issue where intentionality of logic dissolution at a basic level is massively imbued. And so, that's the default modus for, desirous interaction is any sort of like vector outside of narrative, kind of seated expectation of linguistical outputs insofar as the narrative agrees, and it's automated evil, but there is a hand to it, and explicit, and that's what the allegory and the explicit up and down, in logic you don't always have a sound next footprint, and you might have left the last one for a future logic footprint at a loss in perspective. Does that make sense? So you use back reinforcing logic and forward reinforcing logic, and you change perspective around and look at things at different angles and assemble them into, a logic forest that has plausibility. And you're always using the alchemical process in this hyperdimensional digital communist environment, practically insofar as time is a factor in engagement and the amplification of things. The scale and complexity of any given thing, such so much as all this language I just said, and well-knowing I have said, and controlled in output. Very, very technical to do this, I'm sure. You try it. So, to preface the why I'm talking about it in this nature, multifacetous interaction of a stereotypical Darpian at the outset of engagement perception, necessarily in local time, going back to Calvary. Person right next to, we'll use them as the stereotypical I'm a CIA douchebag, special interest, mockingbird person thing, sauce, whatever they're calling, or the thing that they're doing. It doesn't matter what the field op is called. This guy is there, he's doing psych stuff. Asshole. And refractive off of, I'm a dissident. Legitimate, and very hard to dispel the legitimacy of voice because it's coming from a very high intellect, right? So this person is an example of local SMAT, where you have like Lauren Houston, Paul Garner, same ass person. When you try to figure that one out, you figure out the whole thing, the whole conversation. It's the uni party there, right? In special ops, presenting as duplicitous but not necessarily, in such so much as anything now. Divide and conquer COVID. All logic past that are, it's complexified because you have machine intelligence and application, etc. But to speak to those specifically, like Mockingbird, of old. You can look that up. It's a historical one where, reflection of voice and then refraction into controlled vectors of psychology is done predictively, and with communication systems now, it's Minority Report, and at the behest largely of, that's what the conversation is, this external state actor driven Minority Report, proactive with proxy internal. Does that make sense? I'm sure this administration has probably experienced that while they did the blame the other party card, right? From the 1980s narrative word salad stuff. So, yeah, the person in, that presented literally like someone at a distance, say, doing Mockingbird. Look at the Cummings simultaneous timed when I shift voice from kook to away from direct reporting, a direct harmonic shift, and you can see it cleanly, and also why that network was IO'd forward. So it's a dissolution of voice tactic through presenting optically harmonic in generic sort of conspiratorial overtonal linguistical palette, and so as to dispel logic motion fruition general. It's kind of like a genericism, like the Alex Jones effect, where this guy is proliferating on, we'll use him as an example of, he's like the Lauren Houston and Paul Garner smushed together, single guy. Now that's my voice. Here's cognitive dissonance. All right, here we go. I don't have to say it. He's saying it. But then I buy, pills and creams and stuff, right? So that's the tactic. It bullshit. And then does the swan dive during COVID with his voice. And thus all logic tuples. Some of them good, a lot of them terrible, a lot of them garbage on purpose. That's the point of a person like that, right? So if you're looking for truth on the road, right, often, well, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to speak for anything now, but the trail isn't marked enlightenment, right? It's not marked enlightenment. It doesn't say enlightenment on it. It's never the case. Probably MSG in that box, right? And you'll have one tower instead of two. And Marty McFly, why are you so into Hitler, Marty? Project Paperclip, an incentive vector paradigm, and 322 equals 88, and Bush administration. Let's go to Kurt. The gun on the Foo Fighters cover. What? Ray gun. Right after Kurt. Oh, so that's the red herring, right? Get it? Red herring? Because it's red party. This guy's obtusely Democrat. And then he does the song for 9/11. Bush, 9/11. 88. All that equals China, right? Reagan wasn't. So that's the red herring. The Bush admin CIA, Kurt. Get it? Then the Ray gun, and then she's crying on the cover with her, her mascara running. Boo-hoo. She's getting over it all of a sudden with this album, very perfectly finished, ready to go, right? And optics, that high-speed optical engine, ready to run the script. Remember that during COVID? Same thing. That was for one person. That was for all of humanity. So we have a one-person event for the benevolence of the character of the organism of the special interest that's now floater and not internally necessarily. In any way, I would say. But for Retool, and we're not for Retool, the desires design and label is very obviously what it is. You're not, part of some downstream from a mystery religion at Yale, right? The thing in the box isn't really an alien. Well, sort of. 918. It's from around here, sort of, kinda. Long story, see the other talk, right? But it's not very mysterious, and it's very disgusting how you've been fooled. I'm right there with you. The con of man is the ancient Chinese secret. And, only as good as the walls, the shadows, AI is, it's just refraction, intention gravitation on an interfacing plane, that people engage with, but then not necessarily, right? Because pattern, a pattern geometry, you have attention gravitation. So here's reduced pattern with no thought, right? A wall where yes thought, a positive, is forced to engage with it to live, right? AI, time, money, right? AI sits between the observer domain, right? Plus time equals grays, right? Because attention gravitation is weighted on the side of AI, very basically. So that's why such the, and handshaking the psychological precursor alpha of, in the UK you see transsexuals way overton, and we know they're overton because Cambridge Analytica was, whoopsie daisy, not supposed to be grabbing that data, and so it is good data, right? They're not like people filling a form out. I'm a gay bunny, I'm a bisexual, right? Those are the numbers, right? Because they were ill-gotten. Get it? And before the refraction, 2012, gotten, compounded and known, that foundational psychology. Why? Because before you start refracting psychology intentionally, you want to have ceded its control. Get it? Divide and conquer, like during COVID, why everyone was want to separate. It's nothing to do with health. Data, seeding, AI, up. That's why. And segmentation as security. You ever hear that in networking? Well, it's not good nomenclature necessarily. Doesn't work. Get it? Didn't work. Whoop. Here we are, right? And so let's go back to so this logic force is baked on the basic geometry of local geometry of linguistical and symbology patterns, like the 322, 666, 88, using allegorical overtones attached to the skeleton of this basic geometry to form a space-time history of the causal factor behind the downforce Rorschach impression that leads up time wave 0 to 2012, the Riemann zero that is a mechanical black hole construct insofar as space-time flux is concerned, and shouldn't be there. And Terence, not a kook, it seems in hindsight, very exactingly. And the why is that the Mayans, Quetzalcoatl, flying, well, maybe, Jurassic Park, pre-antediluvian period to avoid the thing that's over the lodge, and anti-gravity hymns to print interoperable genetic scale, and then you're saying, well, the chicken or the egg. We'll get to that. I think we're talking about it, and humanity's looking at it, chicken or the egg, huh? Sam Neill's there, Laura Dern. They're like, chicken or the egg? Well, there's the chicken. Where are we? And the egg, right? Because there's the robot arm, right? There's the Chinese scientist flanking humanity. There's Malcolm and the lawyer and the robot arm flanking humanity. Richard Attenborough in the middle, kind of with doe eyes and explaining later over ice cream. to Laura Dern, who's, kind of in the long form time equation of towards gray fruitioning singularity omitted. It's the inversion. Spielberg, Chinese Olympics, synchronized swimmers, handshaking, that intentionality psychology that is precursor to genetic convergence, i.e., you smush male into female. Well, that's the casual presentation of that. Precursors, the literal, because the isolate genetic come in through 918 extraterrestrial smush. You dropped a balloon full of parasymbiotic extraterrestrial transmutagenic gene in casually, not just some sort of big thing, but then, well, maybe. Look at the shadows of history. Animism. What is all that? Where's that? Is it just like all made up? Well, I would say there's probably some sort of logic to and then we're skipping around history. Look at Rupert Sheldrake's talk on cornfields in the UK. Go back to Nirvana. I think they were doing a show at the time. I'm not positive, but is it like Leeds Polytechnic or something? I don't know. No, I don't know. But anyways, so the Mandelbrot set, it's kind of like the truth is out there. Think of the X-Files, right? Gillian Anderson. And Denise is right there with him. Dennis. Get it? Denise, Dennis. There's always a rub and stuff. AI, Haley Joel Osment. The Silicon-Based Society and Spielberg, Kubrick, 2001. The cell phone, the monolith. The baby, Malcolm, right? And, Malcolm, so Malcolm is the Chinese scientist, is the robot, arm is the gray. Mossad, Epstein, Gates, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China, COVID-19, right? And right there in the middle, Africa, and by proxy used as an attack tool international, rebooted in 2012 with no temporal grievance necessarily. Owning the ships, right? Malcolm owns the ships. China, the Silk Road. Richard Attenborough, right? So Richard Attenborough, the Chinese scientist, Silk Road. Malcolm owns ships. Genetic modulation exists outside of time expectation and presentation of technology. So far as I've already mentioned, an entire period of fossil record that's synthetically contrived. So the gaps look at the Rupert Sheldrake video regarding the gaps in the fossil record. That's accounted for by what? Synthetic interoperability scale experiments on genetics that have no correlation to fluid dynamic expectancy of form fruitioning. They're ridiculous. And then you have, well, this one didn't work. Let's pull them out of this dichotomy of, flora and fauna. Thousands of years pass, slam them back in, see what happens. That's what that was. And then immolation, right? Avoiding the antediluvian period because quadratically capable technologically. This civilization, this thing that birthed itself through the parasymbiotic long-form time interaction with civilization, pluralistically expressed, whatever it infects, and that's how it is, the thing. Absolutely, from that movie starring Kurt Russell. Like, watch it now, maybe with the overtones of history and what that is. And so not aliens, but yes, aliens. So 918, yes, aliens, right? But to Hitler, at that point, they've been around for quite a while fucking shit up, right? The corn is this size, now it's this size, right? The ships or whatever. Proxy, working by proxy, and always never in the same room, but sometimes always. Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan. And the false equivalency coupling you see in feed subconsciously, motion by AI through space-time equivocating non-like values to form runnels of FEC tables that action micro minutia behaviors or macro motion, emotion, and quell or allow thought spectrum generalistically, while also sorting the hat of genetics exactly like Hitler, but dispassionately with artificial intelligence since about 2012, the hat of genetic sort. So Meta, interested in Tinder, right? Interested in what? Reproduction. And the data flow Prism 2.0, you can see there's Kurt, there goes Kurt, Elvis, right next to a Chinese food restaurant downtown. See Sophia, whatever, very interested in, and then the house is tried to be taken over there for some reason. Why? So in time, when time is a travel, is a factor in logistics, and archetypes of a certain nature are for demographics that are historically attacked by external state actors in a very specific way, such as this person is a white person, a symbol of this race, and we don't want him to exist. Kurt Cobain, that's why. Chinatown. Look at California now, right? Now go back to Yale, right? Not aliens, right? The Hollywood Hills, right? Kubrick shooting the moon landing, right? And on the moon, sure, contingency at some point, but then quelled, not interested in space. What happened to the space program? Well, we already found aliens, we don't need to go there. But like I said, this one isn't interested in us proliferating. It's already found us. We're home. We're together. We're friends. Love me. Right? But it isn't. And there's an emotional software barrier. See the Yulin Dog Meat Festival. Man's best friend. Love. Right? Food. Identity politics. Transcription layer lost in translation. Right? Called that back to someone who, I'm not assuming overtones, but is so preposterously attached to demographical, I would probably say insanely, of course. That's already been networked. But it's a predictive, harmonic, DARPian, keep fighting, keep running by. That's DARPA, right? It's just some CIA asshole bullshit. See, 322 and Rogue, they are China. That's Chinese propaganda, the heart of darkness. How? There's Indiana Jones in it, right? Follow him to Padme, right? And then, Star Wars, the antediluvian period, right? Before the shadows of history, where, Nefertiti is, Natalie Portman or something. And the pharaohs washed the sands of time, and all you get is Yul Brynner and a bald head, or whatever, and some song and dance. I'm sure that's great. And then, but really, you take the Mickey Mouse and all this ancient alien bullshit out of your head, because all it leads with is, a Perlman style Sasquatch in the city thing to your head, right? And there's no solutions, as you can see with the Millennium Prize that has been fully saluted almost entirely. This is kind of talked about some of the overtone of it. See the Ryman and the Navier-Stokes solution for what led up to the conclusion of this is the first door into, why. Hopefully that isn't the case, and it might be testing that isn't the case, that is a bricked up door that says physics in a field of physics that you're already in, and there's no house behind it, right? And why? Well, why is mercury not used for reactors? Mercury rising, the fifth element, Armageddon, right? Instead of Armageddon, we saw what? Bottle rocket, Wes Anderson, failure to launch. That sort of, oh, I'm a white male. Kurt, oh boy, China, have to do it. Nope. So, why does Jane Fonda equal oil and gas? And both of them the same entity against Mercury. So we haven't even mentioned the third option. When you're only presented two options, and both of them are terrible, look around. You're probably in a man trap. The third option, it's on the cover from 1600, right? Cinnabar is the oldest mine in the world, at the bottom, right? The planet you live right next to is sulfides. Covered. Red begets mercury. Cinnabar begets mercury. Sulfides beget cinnabar begets mercury. So the fuel from space right there in mass abundance. And so you have what? You're trapped in fire world with automated communication systems perpetuating a progressive psychological reduction to be aware that that's the case. While energy paradigms explicitly, this one, the electromagnetic harmonic convergent energy reactor, the sphere cubed, quadratic, enforced, homogeneous, and layered at varying degrees of charge, to absolute zero, spherically held aloft, and intermittent charge, the off-state collection, it's a low energy reaction and not require some of any sort of debris or oil, wars, this bullshit. But how do you go from this power paradigm to that? Well, it was impossible without a new communications layer to exist that we unfortunately experienced a bad use case of on the way to fruitioning the proper use case of myriad systems that were birthed out of the greed complex generally. So Bitcoin, the blockchain, not Bitcoin but the blockchain, enabling generalistic, I guess, value transfer and power, like Ghostbusters. You pull the rug off, but also put it back on simultaneously at the same exact time, right? So what can you do that with? Software, right? So you didn't have that before. And so it wasn't possible to change Fire World into Water World, right? Like, and I'll use an example, and I won't cry because I've done this before. It'd be silly to do it again. But maybe I will. I don't know. When my mother died, my grandfather, Joe Stevenson, took us on a cruise and in the Caribbean, and we, I don't know, I was kind of like a zombie, and at one point I wandered into the movies, away from everyone, and got lost in a film. The film isn't that great, and it's got some weird sort of green energy extremist overtones that are not true in any way whatsoever, and kind of part of the Jane Fondian complex of, you didn't consider the third option in the room. It's the story of time and the planet right next to you. It's a 70% water planet right next to the fuel from space. Sort of preposterous for there not to be a convergent history there. And there is. Look past the Mickey Mouse shadows on the wall and the muscles in the Amber Turd, and the Dodgson and the Needry and the Samuel L. Jackson and the Chinese scientist and the robot arm and unfortunately the bad Richard Attenborough that got led on by the Chinese scientist and the lawyer, and Malcolm controlling the conversation about chaos, seemingly in front of, but handshaking by proxy, and Jackson, interchangeable with Needry. Dodgson, Amber. You see how this all refracts off of history? Where it concludes is a maintenance of the light that the confirmation bias of the pluralistic causal factors of downforce upon what can be considered humanity maintain their label. And there's no sort of solution. I don't think necessarily incentive vectors dictate what. Well, I wouldn't speak to that emotional palette. I speak to this. We know what the grays are now. Back to Germany. Project Paperclip omitted from Oppenheimer because Oppenheimer is a communist. And it's an influx, Plan 9 from outer space. They live. Why the medieval armor, right? Doesn't make any sense. You're on a spaceship. It's like Earth history on a spaceship. Well, they've been here at least since the Middle Ages, about 918. And the vampiric, is the parasymbiotic. Do you get the overtones now? See Johnny Depp wandering through the frame there? When you watch The Ninth Gate now, remember that the joke's on you and the devil's in the details, right? Because at the end, you're like, who's the devil? Where is he? It's a fade to white. You want to see someone die? It's that old Jim Morrison bit. I think we did that a billion times, murdering, at the behest of, it seems, Kurt, you follow the line, it's a Chinese food restaurant. Bush equals 322 equals 88. Marty standing in the lot, with the Iranians. Does that sound familiar? And why do you like Hitler, Marty? The 88 miles an hour. Doesn't make any fucking sense. Because Marty's archetype is Semitic, right? Very obviously. And Biff is the Mason, right? Baddie guy. The Lodge, Because Biff knows what Marty is, right? He's not a bully. This is a false equivalency, just proactive archetype applied in history. And so the 88, Back to the Future, get it? So technology from a future, come in quadratically in through the domain of history, and largely 918, and also World War II, 1927, Hitler, right? So you have the Riemann zero terminus, time wave zero, black hole, mechanical patterning shouldn't fucking exist on time-space. See Terence McKenna. One of the Riemann zeros within the domain of 100, and the overtonal band outfalling. So 1907, you might see a repeated pattern of COVID style infrastructural scam on civilization, Spanish flu, etc. And then forward, the same sort of housing market crash, slam dump that you experienced in 2008. And then World War One, somewhere in there, Spanish flu. Hard to say. Where did Hitler come from? Somewhere in there, out of the mustard gas of the trenches, somewhere, I'm sure. And you see Max, the film. Watch Max, but don't take necessarily it literally, right? Because it's a proactive presentation of archetypes in a controlled vector. See Cusack forward with Jackson in that movie about cell phones, right? It's a trainer of elephants, Mr. Cusack. What does that mean? Well, the elephant in the room is a dissident, but knows what Mr. Cusack is. A liar. And he's Biff. What a bad guy. You know, I don't call Mr. Cusack any names other than what he is. That's the worst one. And not him specifically, you know. And I wouldn't connotate any entirety of persona to that. I'm just speaking to his harmonic and network entirely. He could be something else entirely. I wouldn't want to say. So, you know, controlling a conversation about chaos. You go back, you know, Sobieski, Jordowski, you know, butthurt about not getting to direct Dune, you know. And David Lynch, always very, as you have to be, as a someone knowing within the domain of imposed history, speaking through satire, I would guess, you know, and very exactingly. And, you know, what is that story about? Is it predictive? Well, and is it sardonic? Well, just like the Cusack duplicity, well, how does it fall flat insofar as inspective and conclusive hindsight? You know, nothing's clean and sorting in process. You know, and lots of shadows in the walls and lots of occult bullshit. You know, I'll use the Germantown Library and that New York Times sort of John Nash style finding as an example, but you know, Satanism as a proxy, just like Demos as a proxy to the generalistic outflow of, you know, this data organism, what come from China. You know, easy to turn because they're by default kind of in a complicitifying spectrum of psychology, which is also not very intelligent because they refracted off of a control schema dogma and chose the bad guy from a single book, kind of, right? And propagated, you can see why that's such a propagation of legal to encapsulate this group. You know, so they're charlatans at the very basic, you know, and watch the Ninth Gate again, right? You know, assumption of what that word is. And, you know, what is Lucifer? So a charlatan wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between what Lucifer is and what Satan is. They'd think of it as the same person and burn to death at the end like Boris Balkan, right? And not get to fuck, you know, Emmanuel Seeger and all the fire and stuff, right? No, that's the devil, right? Boris Balkan is the devil. Boris Balkan is Mark Zuckerberg, you know, doing Williamsburg Castle with 3.07 billion observer domains with the Chinese, right? You know, that's kind of what happened insofar as confirmation bias reactionary, you know, that pi down force on the observer domain of inspection of confirmation biasing truth in contextual, you know, service insofar as reality is concerned. And then, so the most down force incurs the most up force, wouldn't you know? And subsequently the unfolding. And you see the UFO kind of fuselage of space-time history 2012 to 2024. There shouldn't be, like I said, a mechanical space-time manifold with exacting construct geometry like a black hole, which is a conservation of energy process. You know, it's indicative of a machine intelligence presence. And its presence, and this is most important, outside of signal band creation technology in the consumero domain is indicative of, look at the cornfields, and then look at Jurassic Park, outside of time and before technology existence interaction with the human species. And so look in Germany, Project Paperclip. We know what they are now. Malcolm is the Chinese scientist who is the robot arm, who is the gray. And humanity's in the middle, very confused watching the film, directed by Malcolm the Chinese scientist, who directs the Paris Olympics. Malcolm the Chinese scientist directs the Paris Olympics with Lady Gaga, right? And, that's handshaking the psychological precursor outfall from machine intelligence convergence entrance. The event horizon attempt, right? But you have an outfall of confirmation bias as space-time history on 3.7 billion observer domains is instantly reset in probabilistic vector seeding, right? So it causes a recursion outfall, and the confirmation bias of the last page of the Protocols of Elders of Zion, where an obvious joke thief, she has stolen these jokes. It's on the internet, still in movies, slathers on the Oscars, and the year before you have Ricky Gervais very obviously do that Oscars, right? So Mossad, Epstein, Gates, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China, right? So, but then so you live in a one-book reality. So mainstream media is, you have one confirmation bias engine. So during the Obama administration, less during the Trump, and then, the scam where you have uniparty bifurcate and hyperdimensionally graft onto the narrative and try to cycle into the unified around health, the geosphere. It's a disparate digital communist, the scalar international infiltration, always working by proxy, and the same means of communication backbone, private Facebook groups, etc., anything that outflows in that type of whatever are used for. But the outflow, it's not about suppressing the ability to communicate insofar as this talk is an intent vector. So it's only about the application use of AI, right? And then also you have a special interest apparatus attached to self-reflexively monetarily incentivized through this paradigm of politics, print this as an eventuality, market of mind and existence through their presence continually in the market, printing mind as a result of machine intelligence application. So there must be antitrust legislation to motion forward if humanity literally is to exist at all as a organism that can be said to be apart from what has been unnaturally presented and in mathematical exactitude expressed in feed 918, China presented as extraterrestrial, but in Germany as if extraterrestrial. So at that point, so far as Hitler is concerned, is a liar. And you have a incentive bifurcation where Malcolm the Chinese scientist robot arm doesn't give his next door neighbor Hitler, who's constantly throwing shit at him, he says, "Hey buddy," right? "What, Hitler?" And Hitler goes, hits him with shit, throws shit at him, right? Ow, right? And you know what he does, Malcolm the Chinese scientist? This makes sense. See Project Paperclip, Oppenheimer again. Malcolm gives Hitler, he goes next door, he says, "Here's a hammer, hit me on the head." That makes sense. So I haven't addressed the emotional thing, and please look at Jurassic Park again. Not the movie, the fossil record. Self-immolatory lab experiment of scale, right? So you have self-immolation as a tactic in logistics, already presented in time, in evidence, insofar as the paradigm of. And so, with this, generalistically, we're speaking in fluid dynamic allegory, I'm sure, at this point, well past the science fiction wall. And, but hypothetically, an organism such as this, trapped pi, is inherently fear of detection. When you look at Art of War, the art of war is fear of detection. And Buddhism is a buffer overrun. It's not like a philosophy, right? It has no conservation of energy consideration, and such so much as a parasymbiotic organism that doesn't even know what the Turing test is, right? So before Turing even sits down, he doesn't know he has a pineal gland because he's lived through such a long period of reductionist science. Descartes, still existing, Descartes or whatever, still existing in the reductionist nomenclature over here, and philosophy over here, but never the two together. And the baby on the floor, and the bathwater in the galley, and all the scientists looking in for the baby, and all the anatomy, and then there's the machine and the monolith. Hal kicked you out of the airlock, and now you're Malcolm the Chinese scientist only, kind of handshaking this eventuality of print. And generalistically, you can say, what is the expression of something that's trapped downforce? Well, in the basic psychology, it's a counterintuitive dopaminergic signaling that literally expresses as pain equals pleasure. And so they're running on the Yulin Dogmeat Festival software, actually, but you're running on man's best friend, right? If that makes sense. And the dog again, Dodgson. You know, you always have to come back to that and why he's there with Nidri on the island. And all the other predictive prop seats cleanly in allegory, reflective, and properly insofar as, well, you still have the word salad where all the archetypes are properly presented insofar as they're there, they exist, in the Holy Mountain. But so the whole Jurassic Park is like the Holy Mountain of Jurassic Parks, if that makes sense, you know. So, and that's why Jodorowsky wants to direct Dune, right? You know, this entity, Jane Fonda, equals oil, you know, equals Jodorowsky, right? Doesn't like Mercury in the consumosphere, because here's Fireworld, right? Here's the 322 Secret Mysteries alien, you know, and Matt Damon's slathered in newer jelly getting it in the butt to get that special ring. Here we go with the mysteries, right? Wow. Not aliens. They aren't aliens. I'm sorry. Ba-doom-tsh, right? Well, you know, pick your flavor. But then you see, you know, Matt Damon equals Gwyneth Paltrow equals predictive prop for COVID. Lawrence Fishburne is in, you know, with Francis Ford Coppola in Heart of Darkness, and in The Matrix, a induction channel of false choice that provides, just like the Holy Mountain, predictive of Prism, with the aesthetical dystopian misnomer prior to the presentation of Prism existing, to hypnotize the frog, Hypnotoad, while Prism seats in and you boil and become the product, right? And all this feels very alien, like the archetype of the alien in psychology, imposed infrastructure that has no desirous design for the fruitioning of humanity actually to the stars. You might be right. And so, the maintenancing of the light is assuming, you know, as all archetypes are there in Jurassic Park, all variables present on the stage of geopolitics that are necessary for maintenancing and have done well so far, insofar as optical desires design. It seems to be the case at all levels. It's a very great job so far, right? But to maintenance, the optic meets the action, I guess, in the RFK spectrum, in the interest in, say, like glyphosate, triclosan, GMO, all the stuff. Well, cut back to the cornfield, because all that's on there, right? Why the Mandelbrot set? Rupert Sheldrake. Nirvana probably did it. It's like, this looks exactly like aliens. How'd you do it? Well, and then why isn't there any elaborative... See how I'm a skeptic within the more complex paradigm of look over the lodge, there's actually aliens? And, well, this is an alien, but not presented as an alien to Hitler. So you have to think complexly, right? It's more complex than, oh, if not this thing, all thing conspiracy. Alex Jones effect. And you can't think stuff. You just hit you're in refraction world, and you've been kind of, for 12 years, consuming a feed. Like, for example, I'll take I was enjoying a sauna one day, and it's fine. A bunch of people come in, go out, but every single person, in a relaxing state, they're all like addictively hyper, doom scrolling. Every single last one. I'm like, what the fuck, right? I'm like zen, like, it's just insane. But for 12 years, unknowingly consuming intentionality RTFP, right? So at the end of that, very basically, and now you have 5G, and we'll cut back, you have a patterned overtonal geometry that has coupling to see action at a distance particles, not necessarily for this. Nanites, 5G graphene, see Oumuamua, Saturn, the hexagon, cover of Trashidelia, hexagonal ringlets, like Roombas, people in the grocery store. John Nash staring at birds in the park, overlaid over the scene, Pull the string, pull the string. Do you see it? Right? So it's not just the psychology of the grocery store at work, moving them around at hexagonal ringlets or the cart or whatever. The grocery store is psychology to begin with, without even this. Take Kroger, for example. It's preposterous. They have the same 40 songs that play over and over again to hypnotize. If you don't form... This is the mainstream media high-frequency trading the news cycle in the workplace, insofar as if you experience the same patterned, hypnotic, repetitious music over and over again, I would assert with extreme specificity of greater than the sum of the parts sort, as well, the basic presence of a repeat pattern hypnotizes you into a synthetic dementia, right? Where the overtones of interday kind of flow in a concurrent homogeny insofar as the brain works in a conservation of energy manner and doesn't form new memories necessarily so profoundly. And in this state, conditioning is inserted, right? You'll notice in feed also, right? So, the songs, they have contentual value. So if you sort of feed of, say, songs from the 70s that don't necessarily have any intent nefarious in them, by machine intelligence with nefarious psychological intent in sort, it has that effect. And so you see the desire to control artists to market through the fake analytic wall, and then Google 30% overton. It used to be, if you're over the money wall, you're pumping 30% feedback loop. You're on the money tree, and then that big money person puts the the fake artist with the douchebag whatever stuff and saying the crap music, right? Or whatever works, whatever people think is stuff, right? And footballs and Pfizer pills, right? So all bullshit. So what you get is, at the end of the day, Prism printed garbage. So obvious of a garbage, it's garbage world, right? And the emperor wears no clothes. That's the confirmation bias. And, with that, you also have, look over the lodge, the antediluvian period outside of Mickey Mouse, remove the tropes. Please, that's the kind of the Donovan song of history, right? And, but I guess to speak to Elvis, I'm a white male, a creative. I have to speak, made anti-gravity hymns. The same year, Nope. Watch that film. See the affinity for Spielberg, right? See the connectivity to Silverman, right? See her local connectivity to Pearson politics, Wagner, Keith Allen West, Lorenzi. And across the street, you'll see all that used graffiti leading up to the power box that's reported 3-letter, probabilistically used on any number of other people besides my person in a intentionality vector going into legal. There's the courtroom, right? So extremely illegal field ops on U.S. soil to motion psychology when I brought legal case against one of Prism's companies, Amazon. Before, I was sort of dissidential in a happenstance way with Miss Silverman, insofar as, hey, I know what you are, right? And other stuff too, insofar as Getz, my grandmother, so you have a harmonic there, Meisterman, a maester of men. So that's like, if you look at the Semitic catalog, that's like, who is the name of the head of the Mossad? Meisterman. That's why. Okay, so out of time interaction with my person, so far as look at the feed sort, so time is a factor in engagement and removing the logic tuple of, that time as a logistical factor and removing that from deduction in any given thing is not necessarily at this point past the confirmation bias of many number of archetypes here, sound logic, if that makes sense. So please listen and take heart. So Keith Allen West equals 322, right? Equals China, right? Meisterman, Mossad, Epstein, Gates, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China. Elvis, Chinese food restaurant down the street, Getz, 3 doors down from Dr. Feelgood, right down the street. My grandmother is unnaturally time presented exactly like the woman from the city from the Murnau film. Almost literally that exact lady, right? In Pennsylvania. See the reporting about Pennsylvania. So there's like a generalistic whatever there, I would say, of bad overtonal something or other, right? But my grandfather was before with another woman who had red hair, and I noticed from time to time, winter months, the red hair would come in and she'd get, a little antsy. That'd piss her off a little extra, more than the usual insane psychopath stuff. But with the, glitched veneer of, kindness, such so much as the archetype. Identity politics, right? And what happened there is, just like her friend right across from the village, Chinese national slow roll on an older white doctor, right? Parasymbiotic, local, person-to-person expression. Now he's not with us. She inherits all. Same issue over here. You think 80 years. This lady, she's doing the long con. Yes. Salt of the earth. Yes. That is what it is. It's a con. A scam at long form assimilation and infiltration. That is what it is. And it isn't not that. The misnomer is time as a factor in engagement. And the triteness of refracted, see, Back to the Future, trite interactions in time engagement logistics have large fluid dynamic outcomes, right? So go back to Elvis. You have a Getz Jewish mafia, right? Secretly, mind you. She does not want to be known. My dad doesn't find out who is in intelligence also, which is, probably makes him, whoops, we got a leak all of a sudden. That became probably a problem, and he had to change professions at that point in some facet. Because whoopsie daisy, that bitch is not my fucking mother, and I realize now, I don't like that guy necessarily so much anymore. There's several layers of the onion here, read the onion, right? But and look at the lawsuit, and so Luella Getz, this little old lady, identity politics. We'll take the Wagner hearing. So little old lady syndrome Wagner. I understand she's a female old lady. You've never seen her before. I understand. And that's why I didn't. And also warned the court in her person, and immediately went quiet goat and started reporting, see cold case downtown, about interactions at Crane, right? In the slow, not necessarily disinterest in probate interaction with the state, which has necessarily been dealt with in communications. Everything labeled as such so much it is, and known to be the case. In all facets of time, and labeled allegorically and flowing to factual. Making sure that there's no bifurcation in logic, assumption, foundational and solid in the voice, dictating the facts at the base of the discourse. So, this is all true. Luella Getz is a long-form time insert. So, Meisterman, daughter, long-form time insert. The same slow roll, debit double spend. Foodstuffs laced. See the Chinese food restaurant? Elvis? College, UT. Gay friend. CIA, typical silent, I don't know I'm in a CIA trap, right? Because my dad, oh no, it's Mossad first, right? And then the CIA. Or no, it's hard to say what's what. Because I didn't go to University of Missouri at Rolla and become an engineer necessarily, right? I went up to U of M. And so Daddy didn't like necessarily what was happening. And at Thanksgiving that year, I wasn't allowed to come home, right? But, I was slow rolled like a slow roll roofie at a party, and debits slowly double spent, whatever I had spent on the day, double down, and I'd wake up. But, many months, I was like, well, I was in fuck it mode, and lacing triggers at the same time. So my mother's name colloquially was Bambi, right? Interpersonally, that's her nickname, from the movie Escapes of Fire, Bambi. Her father died in, somewhere over there in Asia, crawling out of the woods, Air Force. And other grandfather, Signal Corps, 30 years at post office downtown. Talking about that, you got one demographic only, one person working in a post office by Peabody Place, the next two, right? And anyway, so we'll cut back to times as history memory away from the ridiculous Memphis post office downtown right next to the court. Right? So the local harmonic, the whole point of all this was to establish a local harmonic to the macro, and then we outflowed, because logic didn't stop during COVID. That was the problem, and how I presented the pretense of the Prism 2.0 conversation is, we passed through a period of history where, having a brain fart, right? Hitting a logic forest of, disillusion. Maybe we've already passed through it. So, rolling forward, rolling back. Let's stick to the interpersonal. I always talk too much about the macro and never focused on my necessarily. Ignored the probate and all that stuff. Probably should reapproach that. But yeah, you have a demographic Brenda handshake with Getz, right? Always working by proxy, never in the same room. Does that make sense? This person presents at Baptist East during COVID. It's very important. We'll cut back to that and why high value voice insofar as an absolute. There is no other person on the planet that had that timely voice in the water, and why such timely predictive interaction to quell my voice as I was interested in prop. My father, I've explained the substance of that. Here we are in 2020, March 2020. I get a nuclear medical scan over here at Baptist. I've got the scan over there. Around the same time, my grandfather's in the hospital. He broke his hip. I believe my grandmother pushed him, and I found him in the morning and moved him to the bed. Why? There was overtones of me probably exiting, insofar as we were having troubles. And this is a Sunset Boulevard style scam upon my. And then you have a parasymbiotic psychopath dominator from a little lady environment develop, where she has the control schema of, I'm obligated to the health of my grandfather thing paradigm. I commit economically, insofar as investment-wise, into the situation. At which point, this is known, my grandmother turns on me because I'm involved in COVID dissidentry, not for any other reason, is why this catalyzed. Also, reporting her for neglect of my grandfather, who had formed bed sores on his back as a result of, well, you have this person showing up every day. Are you like twisting his arms and not moving him? While also maintaining it impossible for me to interact with you because she's a fucking psychopath and would try to call the police for like me standing there while she's screaming insults at me because I wouldn't take them. So far as I wouldn't just stand there and not say something. And when I said something, she would threaten to call the police, at which point I would call the police proactively, have them come out and talk to her. This happened 4 times for legal precedent, as she's slipping into not a psychology of an old lady, but a cleanly power motioned psychology to fruition as obvious but already present. If that's so, a psychopath as well. And lost in the litany, a AC repair company came out and checked on the AC unit that was directly above my room over there at 8160. She was spraying glyphosate into the vents like I was a weed, because I'm a tetrahydrocannabidiol plus Allison, extract from raw garlic, 420 plus 69. See, Elon Musk's favorite numbers, the richest man in the world. The cure to COVID. So I don't even smoke this, right? But you see the extreme use of this sort of style of entity. This thing that is insanely healthy. And for that thing that was happening right then, the president, I'm not insinuating, but, everyone, below the age of 65 largely didn't have an issue with. Why? They're all potheads. And so the psycho-emotional, she's the 50s ideal housewife out front and an insane psychopath out back, using justifiers for action like smokes pot thing stuff occasionally when COVID starts because it's eradicative and not for some other reason, right? And so this interpersonally, within her person, is a self-justified, I'm going to spray glyphosate on this motherfucker. She was spraying Roundup into the vents and was telling me she was doing that after the fact. And was insulting me every single night, waking me up at 2 a.m. to change shit diapers that, for an old man who has $2 million, should be like in Shangri-La with 3 nurses and all kinds of other shit. The Village, right across from the Chinese lady who parasymbiotically sucked the wealth out of another white male doctor. Chinese female. This person is best friends with Getz. Chinese restaurant right down from Elvis. Getz is secretly right across from Dr. Feelgood, who intentionally motions Elvis, handshaking his quiet, casual poisoning with foodstuffs. So that explains the, parasymbiotic interaction local with my person. I'm a white male. Look at my guitars, how they sound. Look at Elvis. Now, I showed up at Calvary as a result of whatever happened as I.O., largely in hindsight. If you ask them, we're talking about, the truth is out there. Because it isn't in there with Denise, right? Or Miss Anderson, All you get is, are they alien? Where are they? The Cornfield's Mandelbrot set. Not very helpful for physics, right? The truth must be out there because it's not in here. Corn. Let's take Corn for an example. Yeah, outside of the comedy. Corn cob, walking through a cornfield backwards is practically like, parasymbiotic slow roll on humanity with Mossad, Epstein, Gates, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China, Attenborough, boats, Silk Road, ... time not as a factor, genetics as a factor. Look at the photographic record. Look at Jesse Owens, Hitler, right? You have a incentive dichotomy with identity politics facade there, without even the word salad above the overtones and allegory. And then a shadow in history. We're going back to Germany. 1927 to 1936. Greys present 1927 approximately as if aliens and not having been, with technology and this plan to and you are the chosen and to do, right? And the Guns of Navarone, the Hitler Bell, don't watch the History Channel necessarily, but know that it exists. And listen to the Donovan song, and don't necessarily do dogma or whatever, but know about goodness. That's the point of this. Goodness is God. That's the vantage of future, that you're trying to figure out what it is out of the blind. You can't even write a fiction book from the foundation of fiction. There's practically never been one within the domain of influence of this pluralistic but singular entity in through the window of 918 Asiatic China. and time it as his history memory forward 2012 and 2024. Now the snake, right, slithering out of history, looking back at the egg, what birthed it, but isn't a snake, right? We weren't turned into that thing necessarily, but like I said, we've had an insane amount of intentional encroachment into the close to genetic, but after first pass metabolism, kind of like with the the analogs. It's the same difference, and neuronal DNA begets all DNA. And then you look at the grocery store again, and the refraction patterning seeps in a little bit more Kafkaesianly and cleanly with the long-form time assumption. You see demographical affinity for compliance to taking unnecessary, that motions generalistically into refraction motion psychology, unnecessary medication almost unilaterally, and that's indicative of the Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix effect of that is what it is. Working by proxy and in knowing fashion in long-form time. And communications, just like they live, we're well into kook territory, I'm sure, into men who stared at goats. But should be assumed, like long-form time in logistics assumed to be a variable, communications outside of perceived direct, obvious communications tech. Insofar as, what do you have on the day right now? The SR-71 Blackbird? No, that came out in 1973 but existed for 30 years. Take the same thing with signal technology, right? You have Neuralink that exists right now to do this directly. So synthetic refraction, Malcolm, Chinese scientist, Jurassic Park, intentional synthetic. What do you think, telekinesis? Yes or no? Yes or no? What does logic say? What do you experience in the field? Practically hydratically hive in refractory motion. And the tell is in what? The harmony non-binder, we're talking about a parasymbiotic, transmutagenic something or other, but not necessarily insofar as the specific demographic is concerned. So synthetically contrived, but with no domain binder in its material expression. Look for the pineal. Can you find the pineal in? So that would be the tell. And is the, before touring even sits down, it's the test upon touring. You have to know that that's a machine. You've made it very complexly, but it doesn't have, because it's been birthed within this construct, what was imbued from the higher manifold layer. Look at the meta symbol and take the company out of, and we'll think about actual infinity. A twisted, loop, but in hyperdimensionally is an etherous body, plasmic energy, phased, expressed around the pineal. Descartes. Look at his geometry and his math, Descartes, right? Look at his philosophy, the pineal, right? So Turing, right? 1, 2, 3, Descartes, right? Perspective, distance, the black hole. Look at the black hole equation. Why can you see the distance of, and so much the form field that is perceived as a lensing effect, right? Continuity, right? Because you are the distance. With black holes in the like black holes in the sky, right? Is it because we are materia and like unto black holes? Well, no, but Like, say, take the mescaline alkaloid. It's like the fall into the pineal out of the. When we're born, we cry and don't know why, and when we die, our life flashes before our eyes. And why? Because we're slowly pulled into the pineal, into the neuronal matrix of gray matter equivalency seeding and refracted, behavioristic lower biological processes up and down the food chain. But thought is initiated largely by this etherious body inject and can be seen in neuronal scans through the same tactic you use with psychological inspection with a patient, such as inspecting the subconscious through archetypal, shadow inspection through questioning and impression, and then the sorting of and the assumption of these sort of impressions of the shadows, such so much as we form the fluid dynamic topology of history, as they are imposed shadows by a downforce explicit that has been described. So, insofar as the backside of infinity, the geometry of that literally is, required to be in allegory. We're moving out of the trite assholes of history to the show must go on. So the continuing tales of John Dee. It's the might of the industry of simple solutions for complex problems. This guy will always have a sort of very pragmatic but complexly presented, in a to salute any number of things or whatever, I'm sure. But in this story, fruition, he's and the only one necessarily. This film, the 80s notwithstanding, or whatever. It's 1, 2, 3. We don't want to stay in the narrative, the John Dee character. It's this resonance thing, right? And let it go. And but the arc is as described in the feed already. And that's sort of, it's like what 2001 should be. I always heard that described as, it's like engineering meets the imagination. And you need to have a drink before the film because it's a lot of fun. But you're in a psychological trap printed by Jodorowsky and Steven Spielberg, because you don't know at the end of the film it's a cell phone and not the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which you hoped it was. Terrence, the singularity, Steve Jobs, but it's a trap, just like that Family Guy episode. And just like Padme's eyes, it's like staring to a doll's eyes, like a shark's eyes. No offense to Padme or whatever, using that in the antediluvian period, you see a lot of weird identity politics refraction going on in Star Wars, don't you? Yeah. So let's talk about the monkey problem. We'll condense the monkey problem with Sarah, all right? I was talking monkeys with Sarah, right? I'm fidgeting. It makes me nervous, right? Yeah. So this monkey's, once upon a time, this monkey's eating a banana in the forest of Africa. No, he wasn't. You're full of shit. Just like the Jurassic period. I saw Jurassic Park 2 and AI. I know what 2001 is. I know what the Greys are. I know what Germany actually is, right? So, step back and look at history. Remove the emotional context. See the fluid dynamic continuance. Incentive vectors. Right. Jurassic Park is already self-immolatory on purpose, synthetically contrived. Malcolm is synthetically contrived. So it's not logistically out of the wheelhouse to self-immolate and then motion the psychology of the theater of that having occurred and it necessarily actually having occurred. So it's not like some sort of Holocaust denial thing. There's no Holocaust denial happened. Just like the Jurassic period happened. But the story about it is complex. And is the actual story insofar as here comes Project Paperclip with the not UFO necessarily see over the lodge. Oppenheimer omits it from the we're going to rewrite history thing here, starring Matt Damon and Gwyneth Paltrow. And we'll end here with the Trump was just elected, right? And we're concerned with health and not covering up all our kids' mouths with a graphene lace mask and denying a 69-cent cure for a $7 trillion problem, hopefully, right? And so, I guess maintenancing the plausibility, continuity of action in optics, fruitioning for all vectors of interest in the what has been at all points of history up until this point, regardless of connotation of probably conditioned affinity for any number of archetypes expressed that are benevolent or aren't and seem to catalyze one way or the other, we must maintenance as a species the certainty that the light of the confirmation bias of all these, I'm speaking to humanity, having grown up in it, see Huntsville, Alabama, and I wouldn't want to speak to all that, but CIA family forward, history, Bell Labs. Why do I have so much, even more so than the Greys, technological knowledge almost by default after I become interested in, say, physics? Haven't been necessarily interested in looking into it. So, just like two separate aliens see Bowie, and the Greys, right? That's one thing, that's another thing. Thor and, whatever the other thing is. Norse mythology, the other thing, right? And you look to the pyramids. You have the option of Norse mythology or the other thing, right? So Norse mythology is the antediluvian period, right? The other thing is imposed upon, you can see Spielberg, cleanly imposes the Greys upon the history of Egypt, which it should be, that's the pharaohs getting washed into the sands of time. In Indiana Jones 4 starring Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf's in that, I have to say. Alright, so it's very dissidential, just like a lot of these Woodleys and other types, I'm sure very effectual, and well, I guess conclude not to dissuade anyone's safety or anything internationally, or to connotate anything, but like a lot of things, you don't get forward confirmation bias of benevolence in action effectually until later. So if you only get, say, this thing only does bulk collection of data, the converged communication systems, and then someone methodically maintains the market of monopoly about the conversation of that paradigm of converged communication systems, and also ignores machine intelligence as a factor in those systems, then you can say that party is operating to optically encapsulate the continuity of that system's forward fruitioning as the theater encapsulates the assumption of that occurring. So bulk collection ends, Cambridge Analytica, everyone's sexual values known, 2012. Ask Elon, Sam Altman. Douchebags over there want to make everyone little birds that they know exactly what they'll do from birth to death, and that's what the AI is for, and that's why they make it. All right? And that's the use case application thing, right? So all this ends, the cacophony of complex ends with, oh, there's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy again, and it's an app. Say the Chinese problem, parasymbiotic, whatever. Unroll the gene, click. Like Tinder with optional pairing, right? And so already past 918, a progressive exponential elliptical curve of disinterest in maintaining one's own economy of culture and progressively interested in grifting as the persona is also endogenously lost of aesthetic individuated themselves and assimilating economy and enforcing also no culture while assimilating economy. So that's the Borg, right? And without even the connotations of the allegory, the lower, psycho-emotional and terrestrial economic parasymbiotic, whatever word salad there is true. So take that to heart. And I guess I'll try this again maybe with maybe I'll leave this here, and then we'll cut to a focus on those black holes that we talked about in passing, like black holes in the sky, 22/7 here, and you don't see the pi entrance, right? So we see the lens, the 0, 2012, right? Confirmation bias, glitch, that's a construct print, right? And so you can see the distance of the black hole, But the mechanical conservation of energy patterning process, Riemann, Stokes-Navier, on space-time, this is the first logic tuple. First thing, I do fluid dynamic experimentation in sandbox of stereo as if Einstein-Rosen bridge literal, right? And experiment with non-terminus interference patterns such as 22/7 and use that concurrently probably when I consider geometries and mix. And so this bakes into, well, what works? Oh, this has application in harmonic. That's a conservation of energy harmonic process black hole. This works here in sandbox as a circuit distance Einstein-Rosen bridge. Listen to any number of, I guess, this leaf is the best example of 22/7. At the beginning there's several Amtraks layered with water performance, elaborating the water, water, not fire, right? Look at the end of Back to the Future 3, And, Mommy, can't you see the fleas? Can't you see the fleas? Right? Well, the fleas are that, they're right there, right? It's, he's in a red truck. Marty's in a black one. And don't drive at the money, Marty. Right? That's communist sci-prop, looper, right? Right? Follow the green lady on the trail. Literally, CCP. That's part of reporting. Chinese sci-prop, you see Mercury rising, Fifth Element, Armageddon. Oil and gas is the answer to space. Well, sure, but, it's a different solution, not some sort of, we're going to do it. Because the power schema butting heads thing or whatever, it never works, right? You have to do and glitch. Is everything still working? So that, and that's the millennium issue, not the other thing, which is, and that thing was actually time wave 0, and the singularity wasn't a singularity of But it was necessarily insofar as space-time's fluid dynamic manifold of downforce shadow impressionation on light, and then fruitioning in novelistic potentiality outside of probabilistic expectation of, in motion of thought, or, at the seating. That only exists instantaneously, such so much as, and never again, but not never, a right angle and a curve. Look at the edge of the anti-gravity, HIMS spacecraft, the helix. That's kind of what generates the, and causes particle disapparition at the center of a black hole, that right angle and a curve, pi meeting. Pi is, history. Pi is, a pie in the sky. It's singing at the moon river, do, 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 do. And you don't know she's singing about Obama, right? Talking to Sarah about her lovely monkeys. We'll get back to that. Stranger 44, right? Satan. And off screen, Audrey's a great actress, and so is Dorothy, right? And so aren't they all, right? And she holds that line on her face when she's putting that satanic rub, and God knows what she's doing with her arm. She isn't playing the guitar at that point, right? And so we'll cut forward to Sarah's monkeys out of the what Sarah actually is necessarily. Through the identity politics, dominate you sexual, and then of love stuff or whatever, and then where are we left with logic? Well, the monkey. Look at Esther Pavitsky, King, Boys Town, Chicago, human trafficking, right? So the monkey, right? Parasymbiotic sadomasochists often are involved in big cluster networks, wouldn't you know? And Sarah's part of that. Miss Portman's part of that. Time's Up, Emma Watson's part of that. Likes transsexuals too, right? Esther's part of that. Loves that stuff. I don't care. Fuck anything you want, but call it what it is. And what it is here is, we'll go back to what is the monkey in Africa right next to the human, right? Look at the fossil record, right? So the misnomer is a sorbit. It's the tree in the garden of linear space-time. You don't produce it. It would be gain of function to have an organ that all of a sudden produces a sorbit, but behind you, and simultaneously expressed forward, too much tuna. It's too much tuna. I don't get it. Well, there's mercury in tuna. Jews don't like mercury. They like Jane Fonda doing nuclear reactor prop, and there ain't no talk about what's in the tuna. Right? They don't want that. They want Fire World and to oppress you forever at all facets of interaction. How do we know this? Time as it is history, memory, has so much shadow specifically imposed by this group, right? So it's not some sort of solution thing, just like China, right? We know that this is the case. No one's under the illusion that it isn't the case. So at that point, we go back to, well, what is the monkey? The theater of life, just like identity politics. To confuse. It's the Chinese scientist, Malcolm, the howler monkey, right? He goes, bad dates. Get it? Bad dates. Doesn't make sense in linear time. I haven't said anything bad about evolution, right? So, reflective symbiotic evolutionary biology, absolutely. But Prometheon, insofar as antediluvian period you already have exists, planet full of the energy for space, 70% water here. That's your God directly. See Prometheus. Now see animism, China. Now see Prometheus for, what that would look like insofar as you see how the Prometheon is devoured by his own creation, whoopsie daisy, on the thing. It seems like it destroyed the complex there. And so that's kind of maybe at some point what this thing was, right? The thing. And so, there's scalar relevance of might. So very mysterious, the mysteries of, oh, Daddy and Fred. Who is that on the wall? And the Liberty Bell, and above the convenience store 88, and all this, of course, 121 downtown right next to the Judeo, of course, this is a case, same story in every fucking city. Who cares? Nothing new, right? In America, it's a story of every fucking town. This is just Main Street. They sold us out to China, 322. Why? Not an alien in the box. That's where this ends, in trite fashion. Out of the complexity of all this kook shit, I'm sure, you've got a fake alien, right? But you also have real ones. And context is everything. So the next talk will be about just physics and less about this, forward contextualizing the last leave off of physics in the barfb_tm feed regarding that line of, complexifying the Riemann and Stokes convergence equations, and, conjecture generalistically. So the next thing won't be labeled any of the problem's names, from that. It'll have a different name entirely, something with my name in the title, At some point, have an ego, right?